Welcome to American History and Chapter 3, American Imperialism. Today we're going to talk about Lesson 4, America as a World Power, emerging from the end of the Spanish-American War. First thing that we need to talk about when we talk about social studies in terms of a term called spatial or sphere of influence, which is the spatial region, the area around a state or organization in which their culture, their economy, their military, or their politics or any form of this country may be felt or have some sort of impact, although they might not have authority. So, for instance, Cuba, being 90 miles away from the United States, might feel some of these impacts that we have no authority to govern them and make decisions for them. So, sphere of influence increases. When we take over the Philippines, especially, we're talking about a sphere of influence that opens up American influence into Asia. So, talking about the Philippines, moving over, talking about now the open door policy. Secretary of State John Hay decided that we needed to get into China like many other imperial nations were, with our trade, with our acquisition of resources, and sent a bunch of notes out to the other imperial nations that were present in China at the time. Imperial nations include Russia, Japan, Great Britain, France, Germany, many of the nations of Europe. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but you get the point that there were many imperial nations present there at the time. These imperial nations will grudgingly accept the open door notes because there is benefit to them. They will also have access to resources that some of the other nations had not, along with the free trade that will be given to all nations there that all nations will benefit from. The open door policy will anger the native Chinese, and there's a group of Chinese that will rise up to try to kill or push out any foreigners, any of these imperial nations that are present in China. This is called the Boxer Rebellion. Americans call it the Boxer Rebellion because when these Chinese rebels got into hand-to-hand combat, it resembled very closely American boxing. This rebellion was quashed, completely destroyed by a international coalition of nations and their armies. And so the United States and Britain and Germany and all these nations got together, got their armies together, and put a decisive end to this rebellion. After the end of the rebellion, the United States has second thoughts as to what the open door policy is doing on a global scale, and John Hay issues his second set of notes saying that we should be able to trade, but Chinese integrity, the integrity of China, the land that is Chinese, needs to remain Chinese, and we need to uphold that integrity. We need to open trade, but not take away their resources or their land. The open door policy, one of the most notorious political cartoons, as though there's a giant hole in the wall of China, the Great Wall, and the only person that holds the key is the United States, although we were the last ones there, so there is kind of a misnomer there. The Panama Canal is next up. Theodore Roosevelt, as President of the United States, was very, very displeased with the war effort in the Spanish-American War and the time that it took to travel all around to the Philippines and all the way back to Cuba and the Caribbean. And he was very interested in seeing what it would take to build a transatlantic/Pacific canal, and started to look into Central America, the narrowest point there in the isthmus between the Americas. The original site was Nicaragua. Nicaragua was very open to having us come in and build it. It would mutually benefit them and us. But we will essentially settle on Panama because it is much smaller, about 1/3 the distance and 1/3 of the effort that it would take to build this canal. Panama, unfortunately, at the time was a province of Colombia. And Colombia and the United States did not have great diplomatic ties. So the United States will do some of the not so proud things in our history here. One of the things is we're going to give them guns and ammunition to start a rebellion. The second is we're going to go back them, and our Navy will sit right off the coast of Colombia. As Colombia is trying to stop the rebellion in Panama, we will stop them at gunpoint with our Navy, saying allow this to happen. And because we allow them to declare their independence, the Panamanians will be very grateful, and they allow us to build the Panama Canal within their border. They'll give us a 10-mile canal zone. However, we want to build it through that zone that is essentially American property. The Panama Canal itself is 51 miles long, just something to think about. The distance in travel between McCook and North Platte is actually shorter than the distance between Atlantic and Pacific at that particular point in Panama. The average width is about 492 feet, just enough so that a ship that is passing from Pacific to Atlantic may pass alongside a ship passing the opposite way from Atlantic to Pacific. Over the course of 10 years, this canal will be constructed. It started in 1904. It's finished in 1914. It cost over $400 million to complete. Very costly canal zone. So the canal has 6 locks, 3 on each side, that will use water level that comes from within Panama at Gatun Lake to pump water into the following lock and raise it while removing water from the lock previous, so that it reaches an equilibrium. These locks are massive. As you can see in the second picture here, there's an individual standing in the middle of one of the locks as they're doing some maintenance. It is a huge lock. 1850, James Monroe passes the Monroe Doctrine. He comes out with this statement that the Western Hemisphere is closed, that this is American territory. This hemisphere of the world should fall under the control of the United States. America will stay away from European affairs if Europe will do the same and stay away from the affairs here in the Americas, not just in the United States, but in South America and Central America as well. Any action to create a new colony or to take over a country here in the United States or any of the other American nations will be seen as a direct threat against the United States. Teddy Roosevelt, building on this from 1850 from James Monroe, is going to say that the military, the U.S. military, especially the Great White Fleet, our new Steel Navy, is going to be used to enforce the Monroe Doctrine after, obviously, the defeat of the Spanish here in this hemisphere of the world. He's going to boast and say that we have the power to eliminate anybody over here interfering with the Monroe Doctrine. Lastly, the idea of dollar diplomacy, which is, by definition, the use of a nation's economic power to influence other countries' political decisions. And Teddy Roosevelt dabbles with this, but Taft is the number one user of dollar diplomacy. And as markets open up across the globe, we have increased influence in other nations around the globe. And if other nations want our goods, as they become more and more dependent upon them, we have more and more influence upon their political decisions. So say if a nation is a dictatorship and oppressive to their people, not giving them civil liberties and civil rights, then we have the ability to cut them off. And if they don't get the goods, perhaps they will suffer. And dollar diplomacy is using our economy and their dependence on our economy as leverage against them. And with that, we come to the end of lesson 4. So we will come back with lesson 5 very shortly.